The women who worked the riverbank at Southwark had a name, and a bishop gave it to them. They were called the Winchester geese, not by the men who visited them, by the man who owned the ground they stood on. Because the land those brothels sat on belonged to the Bishop of Winchester, the same church that stood in its pulpits every Sunday and called this trade a sin, held the deed to the street where the sin was sold, collected the rent on every house, and pocketed the fine each time a rule inside them was broken. A woman could be dunked on a stool, fined 6 shillings, and driven out of the parish for the crime of keeping a lover, and the bishop banked the 6 shillings she was charged for it. He condemned the trade, and he owned the trade. Those were the same sentence. And that is the part the story always leaves out. You picture the brothel as the oldest business in the world. A room, a bed, a woman, a coin, and a keeper skimming the top. What you are actually looking at is a piece of real estate that a very respectable man owns from a safe distance, rented to somebody disreputable enough to stand in the doorway and take the blame. We're going behind that door and into the accounts. We'll open a licensed medieval brothel, a stew in England, a Frauenhaus in Germany, a city-owned house on the Rialto in Venice, and follow the coins in and out. And by the end, you'll understand why the person who made the most money out of this trade was the one who never once had to admit they were in it. If history told through money is your thing, this whole channel is that. A new dead business every week. First, let's correct the fantasy about who's even in the room, because it's wrong about all of them. There is the woman. She is the one everybody pictures, and the one who kept the least. There is the man who runs the house day to day. The English called him the stewholder, the Germans, the Frauenwirt, the brothel keeper. He does not own the building either. There is his wife, who in case after case in the records is doing half the actual management, handling the money, the food, the discipline, and sometimes the worst of the cruelty. And then, standing invisibly behind all three, is the landlord, the town council, the bishop, the prince who sold the license, the one who never sets foot inside, never touches a customer, and takes a cut of everything that moves. 4 people, and the one who made the most money was the one you would never have seen in the building. So a brothel was never really a house that sold sex. It was a license to permit a sin the authorities had already decided they could not stop and had worked out they could tax instead. The bed got the customer through the door. Everything stacked on top of the bed, the rent, the fines, the board, the food, the drink, the loans, was the business. It takes most people the whole of this video to see that. It took the medieval church about 10 minutes, and then 100 years of collecting. Before we spend a coin, understand the argument that made all of it legal, because it is doing the heavy lifting under the entire trade. The medieval world did not tolerate prostitution because it was relaxed about sin. It tolerated it because its 2 greatest theologians told it to. Augustine wrote that if you suppress prostitution, capricious lusts will overthrow society. Thomas Aquinas compared the sex trade to a sewer beneath a palace. Take away the cesspool, he said, and the whole palace fills with filth. Read that as theology, and it is a grim compromise. Read it as a business license, and it is extraordinary. The most powerful institution in Europe had officially declared that this trade was a drain the city needed in order to function. And a drain, conveniently, is something you can own, regulate, and charge for. That is the permission the whole industry is built on. Now let's build the house. Start with the location, because in this trade, the location is not a detail, it is nearly the entire asset. You do not get to put a brothel wherever you like. The authorities decide, and they decide with 2 things in mind that pull in opposite directions. They want it out of sight of respectable life, and they want it exactly where the money is. So the licensed house goes to the edge, but never the empty edge. It goes near the town gate where every traveler enters. It goes by the river, by the market, near the docks. In Bolzano, the town put its brothel beside the hangman's house, out among the other things a respectable citizen was not supposed to look at directly. In Southwark, the stews sat on the south bank of the Thames, just outside the City of London's walls, which is the crucial phrase. Outside the walls meant outside the city's jurisdiction, which meant the city's own laws against sex work simply did not reach across the river, and whose land was waiting on the far bank, ready to receive a trade the city had just expelled. The Bishop of Winchester's. That is not luck. That is the oldest move in property. You own the ground just past the line where the rules stop, and you rent out the right to do the thing the rules forbid. Now the building, and here is your first real cost, though you will probably never pay it, because you are not going to be the owner. You are going to be the keeper, the tenant, the person in the doorway. The town or the bishop owns the walls. In the German towns, this was completely explicit. The city built or bought the Frauenhaus, the House of Women, as a municipal asset, listed in the civic accounts next to the mill and the weighhouse. Then it leased the running of it to a keeper, sworn in personally by the mayor, the way you would swear in any other civic officer. In Bolzano, the rent on that lease ran at around £70 a year. That is the number to hold onto because it is the fixed weight around the keeper's neck. £70 is owed whether the house is full every night or empty for a month, because plague has emptied the town or Lent has shut the trade down. The landlord's income is smooth and guaranteed. The keeper absorbs every bump. This is the same split you find under half the businesses on this channel. The institution owns the asset and waits. The operator takes the sleepless nights. The college owns the inn. The bishop owns the manor. The town owns the brothel. And in every case, somebody poorer stands inside it, carrying the risk, so the owner doesn't have to. So what do you actually spend to open the doors as the keeper? Less than you'd think on the building, because the building isn't yours. And far more than you'd think on everything you have to stock inside it. You need beds and bedding, which tears and stains and has to be replaced constantly. You need a kitchen because, and this is the first hint of where the real money hides, the house sold food and drink, and food and drink is where a great deal of the profit lived. You need fuel, candles, wine, ale. You need furniture good enough that a paying customer with money in his purse doesn't turn around and walk to the house 2 streets over. Because remember, in most of these towns, the licensed brothel was not a lonely monopoly. Southwark had a whole row of stews competing along the bank. A German town might have one official house, but the unlicensed competition, the back rooms, the bathhouses, the women working out of taverns, never went away, however hard the council pushed. You are competing, and the thing you compete on is comfort and drink, not the sex itself, which is roughly the same on every street. And then there is the stock that isn't furniture. The women. And here we have to be careful and honest, because this is the line where the fantasy of a bawdy, jolly medieval knocking shop collides with what the documents actually say, and the documents are ugly. In the cleanest version of the arrangement, the one the keepers would have described to an inspector, the women were free agents. They boarded in the house, paid for their room and their food, handed over a cut of what they earned, and kept the rest. The standard cut appears again and again across Europe. The keeper takes a third of the fee for each customer. The woman keeps the other 2/3, plus any tips. On paper, that is a business partnership. On paper, a woman could work the house, clear her debts, save a dowry, leave, and marry. And the church actively encouraged that ending because a reformed sinner returning to respectable life was the whole theological justification for letting the sewer run in the first place. That is the paper. Now here is the ledger. The 2/3 she supposedly kept was eaten alive before she ever saw it. She was charged for her board. She was charged for her food and charged the keeper's price, not the market price, exactly the way the medieval inn charged a captive traveler more for a bushel of oats than the man down the road would. She was charged for her clothing, and in many towns, the law required her to wear distinctive clothing. A striped hood, a yellow cord, bells, a specific cloak, so that she could be told apart from a respectable woman on the street. Guess who supplied that clothing, and at what markup? She was charged for candles. She was charged in the worst houses, simply for existing under the roof. And every one of those charges was booked against her by the same man who controlled what she earned. So her income was set by him, and her costs were set by him, and the gap between the two was booked as debt. That is the mechanism. Not a wage, a debt. The women weren't employees, and they weren't quite partners. They were the inventory. The inventories were kept permanently in the red, so it couldn't walk out the door. Historians looking at the German material find exactly this. Women heavily in debt to their keepers, and women being physically traded between brothels like transferable loans because the debt was the asset and the woman was attached to it. We are not reconstructing this from imagination. In the winter of 1471, the town council of Nördlingen in southern Germany got word of a scandal in its municipal brothel and did something almost no other authority did. It investigated. It interrogated the keeper, Leon Hartfreiermuth, his partner, Barbara Tarschenfeinden, and all 12 women working the house, and it wrote down what they said. That transcript is one of the only times in the entire medieval record where we hear these women describe their own working conditions in their own words. And what they described was not a bawdy tavern. It was a prison with an account book. The women told the council that the keepers loaded debt onto them deliberately, so they could never leave, that they were charged for everything. That one woman, Els von Aestet, had started in the house as a kitchen maid, not as a prostitute at all, and had been forced into the trade. And then, when she became pregnant by a customer, had been forced by Barbara to drink a homemade abortifacient, miscarried, and was pushed back to work within days. That is the reality underneath the tidy 1/3, 2/3 split. The split assumes the woman is free to collect her share and go. The debt made sure she never was. So when we cost out the stock in this business, we have to be clear about what that phrase is hiding. The most valuable revenue-generating asset in the building was a human being who had been maneuvered into owing more than she could ever earn. That is the engine. The rest of this video is about who stood around that engine collecting. Now let's turn it on and follow the money out, stream by stream, because there are more streams than the fantasy admits. And the obvious one is the smallest. Start with the obvious one anyway, the sex itself. A customer pays a fee, the keeper takes his third. In a house of 12 women in a busy town near a gate, that is a real and steady income. But look at what's actually pinning it down. The price per visit was low because the customers were mostly ordinary men. Laborers, apprentices, soldiers, travelers, sailors off the boats, and in many towns the fee itself was capped by the same ordinance that licensed the house. The authorities didn't just permit the trade, they fixed its prices, the same way they fixed the price of bread and ale, and for the same reason, to stop a captive customer being fleeced and causing trouble. So your headline product is a low-value transaction with a legal ceiling on it, taxed at 1/3. On its own, that barely carries the £70 rent. The second stream is the one Seneca would have recognized from the bathhouse, and it's bigger. Food and drink. The brothel was a place men came to spend an evening, not 90 seconds. They drank, they ate, and here the keeper wasn't capped the way he was in the sex, or taxed the way he was on the rent. The wine and the ale were his to price, sold to a room full of men who were relaxed, competitive, showing off, and in no state to argue about the tab. Some of these houses functioned openly as taverns and inns as much as brothels, renting rooms, serving suppers, running a bar. The drink didn't just add to the take. In many houses, it may have quietly beaten the sex, because a man might buy one woman's time in an evening and 6 rounds of wine while he decided. Fill the room with what? Not customers for the beds, customers for the bar, who then also visited the beds. The exact same trick the saloon would run 400 years later, and the exact same trick the bathhouse ran 1,000 years before. The visible product is the bait. The drink is the business. The third stream is the one that reveals what the keeper really was, and it's the debt again, turned into income. He lent. He advanced a woman money for clothing, for a fee to enter the house, for a debt she carried in from a previous keeper, and then he collected it back out of her earnings at his own terms. He was not only a landlord and a barman, he was a moneylender whose collateral was a person who couldn't leave. In the good years, that credit tied his best earners to the house. Every stream so far, the sex, the drink, the loans, runs through the same 12 women, and the keeper stands at the one point where all 3 turn back into coins in his hand. And the 4th stream doesn't go to the keeper at all. It goes over his head to the man who owns the building and sold the license. And it is the cleanest, safest, most profitable stream in the entire trade. Rent first. £70 a year in Bolzano, owed by the keeper, no matter what. But rent is only the floor. The real genius of the arrangement is the fines. Go back to the Bishop of Winchester's own rulebook, the Ordinances for the Government of the Stews of Southwark. It runs to 36 regulations, and almost every single one has a dude attached to it. A stewholder who holds a woman against her will for debt, fined. A stewholder who keeps a married woman or a nun in the house, fined. A woman who drags a man in off the street, 20 shillings. A woman who has a pimp, a man she keeps, 3 weeks in prison, 6 shillings, the cucking stool, and banishment. Read those as protections, and some of them genuinely are. Read them as a revenue schedule, and they are something colder. The bishop wrote a long list of things that were against the rules, attached a price to each one, and then leased the house to people whose entire trade lived on the far side of those lines. The fines were not a sign the system was failing. The fines were the system. A meaningful chunk of the bishop's income from Southwark came not from rent, but from the steady, reliable collection of penalties for a sin he had licensed and would go on licensing for 100 years. That is the whole shape of it, and it is worth saying slowly. The landlord made the rules. The landlord priced the violations. The landlord collected on both sides. Rent when you obeyed, fines when you didn't. And because he was the bishop, he also stood in the pulpit and condemned the very thing generating the cash. He was not compromised by that. He was insulated by it. The condemnation was what kept anyone from asking why the collection never stopped. Stack the streams and the business finally makes sense. The sex draws the men to the door. The drink empties their purses once they're inside. The debt keeps the women from leaving, so the first 2 never stop. The rent and the fines lift a guaranteed condemnation-proof income up to a landlord who is never in the building and never at risk. A single customer walks in for one thing and pays in the end toward all 5, and the woman he came to see is the only person in the transaction booked as a loss. So who got rich? By now, you already know it isn't the woman, and it probably isn't even the keeper. Let's do the 2 years, the way we always do. Here is a good year for the keeper. The town is busy, the gate is thick with traffic, there's a fair or a market or a church council in session filling every bed in the district. The house is full. The wine is moving faster than the beds are. Your 12 women are all working and all still in debt, which from your side of the ledger is exactly how you want them, because it means they earn and they stay. The fines you pay to the council are just a cost of doing business, and the drink covers them twice over. You clear the £70 of rent by spring, and everything after is yours. In a year like that, a brothel keeper could live well. better than the craftsmen whose apprentices were sneaking down to his house on a Sunday. Not respectable. The trade sat near the bottom of the social ladder, no matter how much it earned, right down there with the hangman and the tanner. But not poor. You cried about the disrespect all the way to a comfortable house. Now the bad year, and notice that any single piece of it is enough on its own. Plague comes, and the town empties, and the traffic through the gate, that was your whole business, simply stops. The rent does not stop. £70 is still £70 when there is nobody in the beds. Or the church calendar turns against you. Lent arrives, and 40 days of enforced abstinence shut the trade down by law every year, on a schedule you don't set and can't argue with, while the rent keeps accruing straight through it. Or the scandal breaks. Somebody dies, somebody talks. A woman goes to the council the way Elsa's fellow workers went to the council in Nördlingen, and suddenly the investigation is into you. And here is the trap that sits under the keeper specifically, the one the landlord never faces. Your license was never property. It was permission, and permission has an owner, and the owner can take it back. Watch what happened to the keepers in Nördlingen when the scandal broke in 1471. Barbara Tarschenfeinden was found guilty of forcing the abortion. She was branded across the forehead and banished across the Rhine. Leonhard Freiermuth was dismissed from his position as keeper. The house did not close. The building was fine. The women were still there. The town still wanted the trade to continue, and the following year it simply wrote a new set of rules and installed a new keeper. The business rolled on without missing a season. What ended was not the brothel. What ended was them. The council pulled the permission, replaced the operator, and kept the asset. The keeper found out, the way the saloon keeper and the innkeeper and the guildsman all find out on this channel, that the thing he thought he owned was only ever lent to him, and it could be revoked in an afternoon in a room he wasn't invited into. The landlord, meanwhile, took none of that risk. When the scandal hit, it hit the keeper. The council's own hands stayed clean, because the whole point of leasing the operation to a keeper was to have someone standing between the respectable owner and the disreputable work. That is what the keeper was buying with his rent, without quite realizing it. He was buying the right to be the person who took the fall. And then there is the ending that took the whole trade down at once. And it wasn't disease, and it wasn't scandal. It was a change of mind at the top. For 100 years, the Bishop of Winchester's stews ran under his ordinances, generating rent and fines, condemned every Sunday and collected on every quarter day. Then in 1546, Henry VIII ordered the Southwark stews shut. Not reformed, not relicensed, closed. The same crown that had tolerated the trade for centuries simply withdrew the permission the entire industry stood on. And notice what actually happened next, because it tells you what the trade always was. The sex work did not end. The women packed up and moved to Cock Lane, to Petticoat Lane, to the other side of the line, to wherever the rules didn't yet reach. The demand was never the fragile part. The customers didn't vanish, any more than the miner's thirst vanished when a saloon lost its license. What vanished was the licensed, taxable, ownable version of it. The moment the authorities stopped collecting, the trade didn't die. It just went back to being something nobody could get rich owning, because nobody could any longer own it. That is the tell. A brothel was only ever a good business when it was legal, licensed, and monopolized from above. The sex was always available. What the bishop and the council were selling was never the sex. It was permission to be the one place a man was allowed to buy it, and permission is the one thing the person who grants it can always take back. So, could you get rich owning a medieval brothel? Run it as the woman in the room, and you got debt. A distinctive hood, so the town could see you coming, and a 2/3 share that arrived already spent. Run it as the keeper, and in a good year you got a comfortable, disreputable living And in a bad one, you got branded and banished, while the house you built carried on without you. But own the ground, sell the license, write the fines, and never once walk through the door. And you got a smooth, protected, century-long income that your own sermons could condemn without ever slowing down. The women got the shame, the keeper got the risk, and the man who got the money made sure everyone always knew he disapproved. Look one last time at who ended up with what. Els von Eestedt started as a kitchen maid and ended as a name in a criminal transcript, remembered only because something was done to her terrible enough that even that council wrote it down. Leonhard Freiermuth ended dismissed, his name in the town's blood book, and the Bishop of Winchester ended exactly where he started, holding the deed to the riverbank, having collected rent and fines on the trade for 100 years, while never once admitting he was in it. You thought you were buying the oldest business in the world. What you were really buying was a spot just outside the walls, on somebody else's land, running a trade that same landlord swore he was against. And the whole time, the sin was never the thing being sold. The permission was. The bed just told you where to stand while you paid for it. The women were called the Winchester geese. Nobody ever thought to ask why the bird was named after the man who owned the pond.